Hello, everyone. Welcome to Feedstuffs 365. I'm Sarah Muirhead. Joining us today is meteorologist Greg Soulje, and Greg's here with a long-term weather outlook for us, and lots to talk about. Greg, I think we're going to talk about the rest of winter here, maybe a
Yes.
little bit of spring, and maybe give us a little warmth and talk a little bit about summer as we move forward here too. So, welcome. Great to have you with us today.
Thank you. Always a pleasure. Yeah, we'll take a look on how winter plays out. And boy, it has been a dominant winter season of cold and unusual snow systems down through Dixie. The lack of snow, now snow on the ground, now the cold. And then as we move forward here in the next 7 to 10 days, some folks who may not listen to this broadcast may be fooled and lulled into complacency as in spring has arrived. Won't be the case, but we'll talk about that as the minutes go by here.
Those of you that are joining us today, feel free to post your questions there in the chat. If you're joining us from social media, you can post those directly in your social feed, and we'll get those to Greg. He is here with us live, so we're going to put him on the spot if you have any questions or any comments or any thoughts you want to share. So, Greg, let's get into it. What are some of the weather headlines you're seeing out there right now?
Well, pretty benign looking map here, but it's encompasses the cold wave weather in that circled area of blue that extends up north to the Twins, back to the Nebraska Panhandle, all the way down to El Paso. Wish they could take a pass on the cold, and from there east along the Gulf Coast, another round here in the coming days of a significant hard freeze down mid-20s into the south end of Texas, that Padre Island, Matamoros, Brownsville area, and that lower Rio Grande Valley. And with time, as the weeks wear on, and I should say as the days this week wear on, extending towards the Gulf Coast and into the Florida Panhandle, that hatched area through Kentucky, just and on top of that, snow. So issues there. But with time, the Pacific Northwest, that front range of the northern and central Rockies will turn active with downslope winds, compressional warming, if you wanted to sound cool at the water counter or the coffee counter in the water cooler, talking about weather. And that's a change in weather that will be a benefit, I think, for the Plain States and at least for everybody else who want to get out of this 20, 30, 40, 45 below zero type cold that's played out across areas of the northern plains and southern Canadian prairie. So on to the weather headlines here quickly. We kind of talk about this in our weekly updates. When we get together here. And again, widespread sub-zero cold over the northwestern half of the Corn Belt. Thank goodness there's some element of snow on the ground, with the exception of areas out northwest of the Corn Palace Sioux Empire region, that south central and eastern area of South Dakota. Snow cover at best, but we have built it on southward with time. So a lot of issues with cold in the northwestern Corn Belt, as it is across the Plain States areas. Another morning that readings were at 20, 25, 30 degrees below zero across Montana, the Dakotas. The extremes Tuesday, that would have been the 18th of February, at 39 below zero at Bismarck. And then this morning here on the 19th of February, 42 degrees below zero. That would be at Lemon, South Dakota, in the far northeastern corner of South Dakota. So there's no escape in any direction you go in with regard to the cold in some of those areas up towards Saskatchewan, the central and southern areas, kind of the north end of spring rains. A lot of snow on the ground that helps with insulation, but they've been down as cold as 44, 45 below zero, not the wind chill, the actual temperature on the thermometer and the vehicle thermometer. As we talked about, that flooding in through Kentucky continues on. Now it's a snow event underway there. And so some already early season flooding going on. Not a big crop area per se. Obviously, we're in wintertime, but it is year round, a big equine area. So some issues there with probably pasture lands coming off the rain, the mud, the ice in, and now the accumulating snowfall. And for a change, a pretty quiet weather pattern across the west. Not good news for the Sierra Range, the mountains of the southwest. And it's been an abysmal, probably less than about 40% of normal snowfall and moisture, is well under that as well, into the southwestern states as well as California. So we have to keep an eye on runoff. And that's an area that we're already seeing kind of some signature of in here in mid-February of what we typically monitor in summertime, the upper air configuration, the warmth, if you will. So some bells and whistles are going off more so than usual in the weather guys head. The snow cover just is just a general look at how far the snow cover now exists. Just about a week to 10 days ago, it was maybe 29% of the country. Now you can see at least an inch or so on the ground as far south as northern Texas, Oklahoma, down past the Ohio. So give or take, we're running at about 50 to 55% of the country covered in snow. This is the snow cover chart here from just a few days ago. Actually, this was the mid-January snow cover chart, and you can see kind of that anomaly that was left over from the snow that came through the southern states, still lingering in the Ohio Valley. Significant snows for a good part of the western through northern and even central Corn Belt locales. And if you want to fast forward here to the current snow cover map, well, it's pretty much looking the way it ought to be for this point in mid-winter time, all the way past the Ohio, some of it through Arkansas and Oklahoma. Patchy at best, though, and so some of these cold temperatures need to be watched with winter wheat and pasture lands in mind across South Dakota. Patchy at best through central Illinois and some indication that maybe even the drought is beginning to come back into play. Yes, we keep track of that in wintertime. Yes, folks sometimes say, well, where do you worry about that? The snow cover doesn't mean anything, but it will come the melt season and put spring rains, if they do come in your particular neighborhood, into the equation. And speaking of drought, here we are. This is from January, about a month or so ago. And again, the dominant areas were out through Big Sky Country, the Western Dakotas, Nebraska. Remember, we had just been coming off that spell of downslope winds, those Chinook winds. So there was not much in the way of any significant snow, or at least it was the way of evaporating away, and temperatures were beginning to moderate. And it's been a dismal snow season of late, and on average, with below average snowfall totals for Montana, Wyoming, the Western Dakotas, so no drought improvement there, nor in the southwestern parts of the country, i.e. Arizona, in through New Mexico, West Texas, Central and South Texas, and still kind of patchy, abnormally dry to moderate snow cover covering a good part of the Corn Belt, and very little change here. This is the one as of mid-February, still holding, if not worsening, in the Southwest, still holding and worsening in areas north of the Nebraska Panhandle. Look at the southeastern states, a little drier than we'd like to see, so the snow and rain will actually be a benefit there, and a little drier still into a good part of the Corn Belt. And just for show here, this is what the feds were thinking. Their monthly outlook, those green areas or beige areas were indications of, at least they were suggesting, they were forecasting drought improvement. Don't think it's going to happen, nor in those areas of Montana. This is the Weather Service, National Weather Service outlook, as well as Tennessee. So some of these areas that were expected to get improvement, just I don't think are going to be happening through the remainder of the month. And for at least the rest of the season, there is some hope for areas of Illinois, Iowa, the upper Midwest, Big Sky Country, maybe as well, but no improvement. We agree with that for the southwestern part of the country, Texas, the Rio Grande, maybe a little too pessimistic over the southeastern part of the country. So really, I think it's the epicenter of issues this era already beginning to show up with dryness and drought over the southwestern part of the country, parts of the plains, and then you start taking into account that what we say the warm ridge, the hot ridge, which at least is beginning to show up here in mid to late February over the far eastern and southeastern parts of the Pacific. That's a typical La Nina setup for South America down there, where they were coming off, and some areas are still going on with dryness and drought. So that's an element that does have to be watched here later this spring and summer. We'll have thoughts about that a little bit later on in the broadcast here.
Is it looking like a fairly strong La Nina, or is it?
It is a moderate one, but it's a
moderate,
a weakening one, and we'll see how that transpires here going forward on the weather maps and charts. And here we go. We'll take a look at this weakening, quickly weakening, probably towards March to early April, but it's a very compacted, moderate one. But so you get these swings back and forth in weather that can be too extreme and too cold on one end, and back to warmer and drier on the other end. And here's our famous squiggly lines. The top left here taking us through Saturday, and then by Sunday the top middle and Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday after that. And basically the key signatures here are these green winds, lines of winds up aloft. They're fast and they're off the Pacific, and they're coming down the Rockies and the Canadian Rockies as well. So milder air, that Chinook downslope wind means snows will tend to evaporate because of the wind. Temperatures moderate the quickly and more fast we could get the snow out of the picture, and the more fast and quicker these winds pick up in the low levels too, you get a milder Pacific air mass in here. And that compressional warming that we talk about off mountains, folks who work in the equipment shed certainly know, with engines, know all about compressional warming, and that's the way the atmosphere often plays out. So the bottom line here, till we get to about Tuesday, Wednesday, those bottom two panels, then if you're watching closely, you can see those green lines becoming a little more compact. They're beginning to dip into the middle part of the country. That's a developing weather system, sort of a hole in the atmosphere. So those winds up through the Canadian prairie, those jet stream winds begin to dig on southward. So you may think that we're going into the start of an early spring. I don't see it. We'll talk about that here as we get into our own long range forecast, the same forecast that you see each week on This Week in Agribusiness. If you kind of put the weather maps and charts into kind of a more surface based look, you can see that feature, at least a couple of them making their move out of the at least the cold air out of the Central Plains to the Corn Belt, all the way down to Dixie. That H that you see through Kansas and Missouri towards about Monday into Tuesday next week, and then by Wednesday, Thursday, it's heading off to the east, and you can see those winds, which are kind of in a U-shaped configuration out of the plains. We'll get these little disturbances, these little trowels or troughs. They're not significant moisture makers by any means, so we're going into a temporarily quieter weather picture. Wind, yes, and I just drives me bonkers when I hear the local weather forecaster talking about a windy and warmer day when temps may come up, but the wind chills are still down at the temperature levels that we had in the start of the cold air surges that come into the middle part of the country. So if you're sheltered from the wind in the equipment shed, it will feel much better around here out of the plains, western and northern Corn Belt, and with time spreading on to the east. But again, take this with a grain of salt. So 24 hours, nothing really going on except for the southeastern part of the country, a little leftover moisture, that snow, fluffed up low moisture content, eastern Corn Belt, and a little more moisture too for northern California, the Pacific Northwest. I don't really see much going on in the southwestern reaches of the country, Southern California, Arizona, New Mexico, parts of Texas, from a moisture standpoint here for probably weeks to come. So, and then we talked about that little high, that warm high, so to speak, over the eastern Pacific. So if you start teleconnecting in your head, well, let's see, dryness, drought, warmth, heat already, you may see the direction we're going here. And with time, the next 7 days, the more significant moisture in red in the Pacific Northwest, lingering Gulf Coast. There's some welcome news for some of those dry areas in the southeastern part of the country, and a little light moisture for the Great Lakes areas. And so, Sarah, on we go here to the weather maps and charts, at least from the 6 to 10 day and 8 to 14 day perspective. This is the stuff that the National Weather Service grinds out. I know a lot of producers like to look at it, keep an eye on it. Some of this you may not get a good feel for, but we'll show you. And no disagreement at all on what we expect to see temperature-wise across the country here going forward over the next 10 days to 2 weeks.
If you have any questions for Greg, be sure to post those there in the chat or in your social media feed, and we will get to those here shortly.
Yes, please. Yeah, when's the time you actually have a weather guy within earshot of answering some questions? So here's your opportunity. Please don't don't make them too difficult. And no, I'm not answering questions. And I do this when I speak publicly. I don't do the global warming thing. So just leave me out of that discussion. Operational, help you save some bucks, a few pennies in your pocket perspective on our value added, if you will, approach to weather forecasting. So
there you go,
Sarah.
All right.
On to the maps and charts here through late this month of February. Those green lines, again, are indicative of winds that are pretty mild overall. That little configuration that builds into the Pacific Northwest, drops into the plains. We call that a ridge, and it's part of that Eastern Pacific ridge. And so, again, temperatures moderate. They warm in quotes if you're sheltered from the wind. And kind of we call it downstream here. If you slide to the east in the weather business, there's upstream, downstream. Downstream is off to your east. And there you have the cold air trough U-shaped configuration. So moderation of the story, especially west of the Missouri. And what snow we put on the ground probably begins to evaporate either through melting, thaw-freeze cycles, or sublimation. Fancy word. That's where you have snow on the ground. The air is dry. The wind blows across it, gets the sun out, and it goes from that snow-covered crystalline look and feel to just basically evaporates without going into liquid form. There's your hydrometeorology lesson for today. 6 to 10 day, and that's there you go. They're big warm up, but moderation of temperatures. It'll be wind blown, but readings that will go from what were probably 20 or 30 degrees on average below average, I should say, to readings that maybe 10 or 15, almost 20 degrees above average in through the northern plains. Wouldn't be surprised if Palm Springs and some of those desert sun bird locales maybe flirt with the 90-degree mark over the desert Southwest already into these late days of February. And moisture, a quieter weather picture. So if you're getting caught up on feed and movement of supplies, livestock operations, livestock themselves, whatever you have going on, it's a much quieter weather picture where we've had recent snow across the middle part of the country, the central and southern Corn Belt, even through the southeastern states. Any moisture confined to the Canadian border and points north from there, those will be fast moving. No major winder uppers or 1-2 punches of significant moisture, and then cold to follow after that. We take a look at the upper air configuration here through the early part of March, and we still got that low that's holding the atmosphere, Hudson Bay, James Bay, for you folks who like the vernacular, polar vortex. That's it right there. It's there all the time, at least in wintertime, at least in a normal setup. And in summer, it's still there. It just moves its way back up to the polar region. When we get into the cold wave outbreaks, it just builds on southward that the circulation you see Hudson Bay, James Bay area. But again, it's a pretty nominal setup with a little on the colder side of temperatures east of the Mississippi. The milder weather continues on from the Mississippi on westward. And so it goes. And so goes maybe a little more pickup into the middle part of the country. I do not agree with this, at least the National Weather Service assessment of pickup on moisture through Texas and Oklahoma. I'm not exactly sure where and how that's coming from. I don't see it. They see it. I can't answer otherwise why it's there. Again, these are generated computer model data. The forecasters in Washington will write up a discussion on it and send it out to the internet. So that's the discussion point for the 8 to 14 day part of the country, right up the middle. So that said and done, Sarah, on to the thinking from the weather guy right here, the stuff that we've been doing and cranking out for too many years I want to make mention of, and that you see on This Week in Agribusiness. And of course, these great broadcasts, which
yes, every month here and a couple times a week too.
Yeah,
we're catching up with Greg here on
exactly.
Feed Stuff 365. So we're gonna have to compare what the the groundhog or whatever the guy is saw recently and what Greg says. So go ahead, Greg, fill us in. What's ahead?
And I won't share my commentary in the groundhog about seeing his lights every year in the headlights of my car. Anyway, I don't want any calls or complaints. Or you can actually fire away down here at the chat box. There's still nothing there yet, so we'll try to get to you here. But I think we're going to really have everything covered before all is said and done going forward. Anyway, for the rest of February, there it is. There's no big surprise here for folks who do this for a living. There's just nothing I'm going to disagree with at least keeping temperatures above average. Black Hills, Nebraska, Panhandle, Oklahoma Panhandle, back into the Great Basin, and points on northward from there. So it's great from a comfort standpoint. It's not great because of dryness and drought, and you need moisture in the mountains, the Sierra, Cascades, Central and Southern Rockies. You work with that from a runoff standpoint. I can already hear, water shortages and cutoff and drought issues expanding in my head already early on this spring season over the southwestern part of the country. And there it is. Again, I don't see any indication right now of any big moisture. Not that I've never been wrong before, but this is the way we're thinking about it. The jet stream is up to the north. The weather systems are fast moving, organized snow and freezing rain and all that stuff as well to the north, maybe clipping parts of the northern and eastern Corn Belt, but a good part of the country looks to be quiet, uneventful here as we wind our way out of the remainder of meteorological wintertime. So we start meteorological spring. It's a bookkeeping thing. We start the seasons March 1st for spring, June 1st for summer. year, September 1 for autumn and December 1 for wintertime. It's just an easier bookkeeping statistical thing. I didn't create it. That's just the way the business works, instead of trying to average things out, whether it's the 20th or 21st of the appropriate change in season. So here is a kind of a reality check. We're back to normal over middle parts of the country, the Ohio Valley. There's another cold air surge. We are not done with this. These mother loads of Arctic air, they go to Hudson Bay, James Bay, they rotate back around. It's what we call in the forecast business kind of a Fujiwara effect. You get a central point and things warble around them in the upper air. And so you get these lobes of cold air that make their way on southward. So we're still in the midst of a quick, moderate intensity La Nina setup on temperatures, and the weather pattern will turn active again. Not for the Southwest, not for West Texas, not for much of Central and Southern California, Cascades, Northern Rockies, Black Hills, Northern and Eastern Corn Belt. Yes, that's probably, again, the return of, we'll just call late season snows and mixed precipitation makers, he tries to say over at Delmon Radio, across the Northern and Eastern Corn Belt locales. Then we get into mid-March, and you thought spring was here, didn't you? No, I don't think so. Here comes that lobe of Arctic air over the southern Canadian prairie, colder than average weather down to Kansas and kind of almost the I-70 corridor back up to I-80 and northward. Temps are going to vary back and forth with sort of an average frontal boundary over the southern plains and Ohio Valley. And if you want to escape the cold, there's some opportunity over the southeastern part of the country. And it's this setup on moisture. So good news from a dryness and drought standpoint. Parts of the Central Rockies, more snow. Late season, I think we start getting into calving operations, I believe, into the northern plains and uppermost Midwest. So you got to keep an eye on footing, the cold, all that kind of stuff. More moisture, one form or another, probably not done with late season snows for the western and northern Corn Belt locales and down to the Ohio Valley. So March looks to be pretty active through mid-March, and there's, yeah, here you go, late March. We're not done with the cold, okay? Just that's the way it's going to go. So we've got this cold air surge, a cold wave weather pattern still back into play. Great Lakes region. The cold will penetrate as far south as Red River Valley of the South into the mid-Atlantic region, and temperatures expected to stay normal, kind of vary back and forth. And an active storm track for late March. Of course, we start to monitor severe weather potential over parts of the southern plains, south of the Ohio into the Tennessee mid-south region, and areas into the Florida Panhandle, and late season snow and some ice are back and forth with these rain snow systems. Start as snow, go to rain, back over to snow across the Central Plains, Corn Belt locales into the northeastern New England. So we see a busy month of March. It may come in like a lamb, but probably is going to exit much like a lion, as you've just seen. Now, into the first half of April, that pattern shift begins. La Nina is still in play, quickly beginning to weaken. We talked about this warm ridge over the eastern Pacific, what we call the 588 ridge. Sometimes it turns into the 594 ridge. Commodity people, forecasters know what that means as you get into summertime. But here it is. It begins to establish itself already over the southwestern part of the country. Big warm up across areas of the west, the central plains, the southeastern states. So maybe opportunities to warm those soils. Maybe some folks want to get out there with heavier equipment. Maybe not, with probably indications of significant moisture. Probably not going to have much access to the spring grain areas up to the north. Winter wheat comes out of dormancy, not a lot of moisture expected, and an active weather pattern, again, favoring the northern and eastern Corn Belt. Keep that in the back of your mind going forward here in the remainder of springtime and early summer and the heart of planting season. Late April, a little bit of a pendulum shift here. The cool air tucks into the eastern states. The warmth is still there, weakening a little bit out of the west and southern parts of the country. Still a northwest to southeast jet stream pattern. So temperatures are kind of back to typical second and third week of April levels across the northern plains to much of the Corn Belt and southeastern states. But we're not done with the rainfall. Again, I think there's probably opportunities for more steadfast field work in the western Corn Belt and southwestern Corn Belt, and more delays early on through late April here into the northern and eastern ones. And again, keep that thinking in the back of your mind. So some moisture and drought improvement, we hope, relative to springtime, not ending though, across Montana, the northern plains, much of the northern and eastern Corn Belt locale, still high and dry, and probably a categorical worsening for folks who watch the drought monitor. We go to a D1, D2, probably to do D3 and D4, where you're getting into extreme drought conditions And I think those are going to be expanding over the Southwest down through Texas and the Southern Plains. May is this scenario, and I normally don't like putting more than a couple of 2 or 3 weeks together, but it looks relatively straightforward. We'll get some oscillation back and forth in these normal areas, but the warm summer ridge is getting locked in over the four corners. The lingering cold air over the probably still lingering snowpack and snow cover into some areas of even the southeastern Canada, Hudson Bay, James Bay. Those cold highs like to migrate there. So that's the story. The jet stream undercuts it, and you still get a busy weather pattern, more favorable planting in the western and southwestern Corn Belt, more delays northern and eastern areas. This is going through May and what we see as a weakening weather pattern. So, Sarah, that's springtime, at least meteorological springtime. Again, we're leaning towards a wet and somewhat coolish northern and eastern Corn Belt, a warmer, somewhat drier, better working operations in the western Corn Belt, southwestern Corn Belt, Great Plains as well. Spring grain areas probably get delays. Don't really see a big snow melt or flood season there off the Red River Valley of the north, but probably some planting delays. More flooding, I think, would be more dominant into areas north of the border, southern Canadian Prairie, that area. And I think it's going to be one of these expanding, increasing headlines. Someone's going to wake up one day and realize there's a bigger drought and heat waves that are going on already in the southwestern reaches of the country. So that's the story through May from the weather guy here. We do have a couple of thoughts on summertime. Do you have any questions?
Yeah, I don't have any questions in yet. So go ahead and let's take us into summer.
Okay, here we go. This is just kind of the highlight, the things that are kind of rummaging through the top of my noggin here for summertime. Kind of not the official forecast, but, because I don't generally do 3 month and 2 month, and let alone it's tough to get a 1 month forecast out sometimes. But yeah, there'll be a lot more days like this, the triple digit stuff. Omaha, the Corn Palace, Lincoln, Chadron, south to Goodland, Garden City, Oklahoma City, and points west from there. At times, we'll get some of that heat to work into the Mississippi Valley and no farther east, and still this low cold air blob relative to summertime. And it's usually the cold air. It's really cold air up aloft that makes the rains. That's the way you get thunderstorms going. It's not necessarily all the time the heat, because sometimes the atmosphere is warm up aloft, and you just cannot get anything going from a cloud building thunderstorm development type scenario. A lot of folks wonder, it's hot, it's humid, how come it's not raining? Well, it's in relation to the ground hot up aloft as well. So again, keep this in mind, that I think even going into the back end of spring planting in the northern and eastern Corn Belt areas is going to be a little more problematic. Dryness and drought are going to be expanding, worsening, while we've seen some marginal improvement. I think that's going to be an ongoing story, and into the central and southern valleys of California, south into Oklahoma, and sections of Texas. And again, it's this upper level ridge. So folks who watch the 588, the 594, what we call height line up at 25,000 feet, it's sort of an average chart that can tell you a lot when you know what it's telling you, if you understand what that chart means. And so when you get to certain numbers at certain levels of the atmosphere, it gets too warm, too hot, the winds are too weak, and that's it. Can't make any rain. And the usual rule of thumb anyway is if you get to May 1 and you haven't had any rainfall of significance into Kansas and Oklahoma, that central and south end winter wheat belt, into the high plains areas, it almost takes on like a Mediterranean climate, like Greece or something like that, where it's more warm to hot days, little if any organized rains, and then it's a struggle unless you can bring a late summertime tropical system in to get any organized weather there. So those are that's not the official summer forecast. It's just stuff that's rummaging through my head these days. So that's the story on what's going to be, we think, a problematic planting season in the Midwest and the Northern Great Lakes region. Better opportunities west. West turns worse as regarding heat and dry, and we get still some organized rains with time and maybe some beneficial back end of summertime heat into the eastern Corn Belt areas, but that will take a while to get there. So that's the thinking for the next, 6 months?
Lots to take in there, but wow,
yes.
that's that drought is a little scary, and delay in planting. I mean, they can plant so fast these days. That's probably not quite as impactful as it used to be, but still, it's something to to watch. Now, we do have a question, and maybe you don't want to take this one, but the question is, with all the changes that are going on in the new administration, is that going to affect how the National Weather Service is able to report on some of these, some of the reports that they do, or their accuracy of these reports? Do you have any gut feel on that, or what's going on in the weather community when it comes to that?
Well, my feeling is, and I have a couple of contacts of the USDA weather operation there that do some great work over there, and I hope that's something that doesn't get touched. But apart from that, really the main duty of the National Weather Service is to run the model data, run the upper air balloons, the surface observations. A lot of that is automated, and it's third-party vendors that monitor and manage that. And then there are the Weather Service offices, the regional offices. That's something that, in my mind, you start combining Minneapolis and Chicago with Milwaukee and Omaha, and you got severe weather going on. That's a problem in my head. I don't like that idea. So that's my concern. They'll always run the models, the upper air data, the surface data. The severe weather stuff is only the National Weather Service can do that. Everything else is the data's out there, and whatever private services want to work with that or come up with their own modeling, which they do a lot these days, that's what they do. So I'm hoping things don't get touched there. I don't have any other contacts than another couple of guys over at the USDA, and that's my knowledge on what's going on. I hope it doesn't get touched. That is a critical element, to everyone, whether you're in the weather business or not. From, like Orion used to say, if you can apply it to everything else in the world, if you eat, you're still involved with agriculture. So that's a sign. That's a symbol and phrase he used to say all the time. So weather impacts and directs everybody, whether you are a daily user of it, or like commodity people and our producers and our farmer friends, or you just kind of watch it on your local TV station. So that's my commentary on that. I certainly hope not. I haven't heard anything, but I certainly hope not, especially from a severe weather management standpoint.
Exactly. So, and of course, we can always check in with you, and you'll let us know what's going on, right? So,
absolutely, you know where to find me.
We can find Greg right here on Feedstuffs 365, or every weekend on This Week in Agribusiness on RFD TV and another 120 stations. Plus, he's on some radio. He's everywhere. So we will be.
Yes, I am. That's a good thing. It's a bad thing too. So
we'll be touching back in with Greg on Friday. So you might want to watch for that short-term forecast, and that should be a little bit mild temperatures. At least you'll give us a little bit of thaw here before you get back into winter, perhaps, at least in the Midwest.
Our producer friend in person might be able to, only take, have 5 layers of clothes going out the door versus 10 in the cold that's going on in
in South Dakota.
For everybody else, yeah.
There you have it, folks. Thank you, Greg. Thanks for joining us.
Take care.
We thank all of you for tuning in as well. If you'd like to follow more of Greg's forecast, you can tune in live, or you can watch us on Feedstuffs 365 on feedstuffs.com. Until next time, for Feedstuffs, I'm Sarah Muirhead.